Well, how you doing? It's IB Nation Sports Talk. We're up and running. We're a little bit behind today. We usually start as close to on time as we can. It's Sean Stires, Jesse Stires in the salmon polo, it looks like today. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm not too bad. Just busy week of work.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's one of those. Thanks for jumping on here. We had planned on starting with the guest, and one of the rare times, unless it's Tom Noy, most of our guests are like, "Oh, I've got stuff going on, so can I record the interview?" And we're like, "Yeah, sure, whatever works for you." So RJ Abeytia out there in Los Angeles, he told me, "Yeah, I can do the show live, 6 o'clock, whatever." So of course I get a text right as I'm logging in. I'm running a little bit behind. I'm hoping that it's just LA traffic, and he'll be on here hopefully within a few minutes. So Jesse jumped in. He was originally going to just, kind of jump on after RJ came on and do a little rapid fire today. But yeah, Anthony says Jesse is focusing intently on something. he's he's getting his last second show prep in, I guess, there, including
Emails.
getting the emails in. Brian and I did my dabble into the recruiting slash commitment game yesterday with the commitment of Logan Thomas, the defensive end. Brian and I uh, had the show on that last night, and Logan Thomas, the defensive end from Katy, Texas, committed. Long, tall, explosive defensive end, going to be I'm sure, a really good Viper for Notre Dame when he gets here. But he said that one of the things that he was going to do right away was get on the recruiting trail himself and try to make the commitment, or try to make the pitch to Justin Scott, and not only Logan Thomas, but CJ Carr and Cam Williams out there making the pitches to Justin Scott. Did you see that on Twitter today?
I did. I saw the screenshots, and I think it's cool when guys are actively recruiting other players, because to me that shows that they are definitely all in on Notre Dame, right? Like, not only are you committed, but you're trying to help by get other people to commit.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is a big one. Justin Scott, he's the one that everyone's talking about right now and that everyone wants. And it's pretty cool. Like, we've seen this in the past where like Steve Angeli was a big recruiter a couple of years ago during his commitment, trying to get guys to, like making the pitch to them, getting them in here to Notre Dame. This is just a huge one. Like, when you look at where things have gone for Notre Dame the last couple of cycles, just missing out on some of the big fish like Keon Keeley, who ended up going to Alabama, and of course Peyton Bowen in the last recruiting cycle, who ended up, he was going to go to Notre Dame, then he committed to Oregon, then he broke the commitment and ended up at Oklahoma instead. But, Notre Dame just missed out on those big fish. So I'll be curious to see just how far this goes with, some of these current commits going out there and making the pitch to Justin Scott, because this is the kind of big fish that they need to be able to reel in. And it's a long way away right now. Signing day is what, 7 months away, a little bit more than 7 months away, I guess, at this point, the early signing period anyway. But it's a guy they need to get, and I'll be really curious to see if, not just what the Notre Dame coaching staff is doing, but if guys like CJ Carr, who right now is the biggest fish that they've got in the 24 cycle, if him and some of these other guys can go sort of be the closer, I guess.
Yeah, just looking at Justin Scott's kind of profile, I mean, he's the third best defensive lineman in the country, number one recruit out of Illinois, and spans between 10 to 20 kind of overall national recruits. So definitely a big name. A lot of people have it predicting between Notre Dame and Miami right now, but the
Right.
5 overall are Georgia, Miami, Michigan, Ohio State, and Notre Dame.
Yep. Michigan's making that push to get in there as well, with Mike Elston, of course, being up there, the former Notre Dame defensive line coach, now up there in Ann Arbor. Well, I see RJ Abeytia is in the waiting room. So, Jesse, I'll put you on hold. I'm going to bring RJ in, and then I'll talk to you. RJ, when RJ and I get going, sometimes it can go for a while. So you might have to monitor and, see just exactly when you've got to check back in a little bit later. Okay.
I will be here.
All right. Sounds good. I'll talk to you later. Jesse jumping out, and our old friend RJ Abeytia from USCFootball.com checking in right now. How are you, RJ?
I'm doing great. I was pleasantly surprised to see twice the Stires.
That's right.
More bang for my buck.
That's right.
Great.
I've said before, I had to manufacture my own co-host, so it took a little bit in the incubator, but one of the co-hosts of the show. But glad to have you. It's crazy times going out there with USC, and of course we're going to talk some USC football. But I wanted to start with what's going on with the athletic director situation. I saw today that they just named an interim. I guess, is it Mike Bohn? Mike Bohn? How do you pronounce his last name?
Mike Bohn is what we've been going with.
Sounds good. It's like
no reason to change it at this point.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. So I guess what's the latest with what's going on with that right now?
I think it's following kind of a very familiar pattern with the way stories happen nowadays. I think, the resignation, which, if I'm not mistaken, was last Friday.
Yeah. That sounds right.
Classic Friday news dump attempt by
kidding.
USC. I think it took everyone by shock, surprise. It seemed that USC was a little surprised that things had happened and the manner in which they had happened. But once you get past that initial story, there's more. And I was on Sirius, I was on Pac-12 radio a few days ago, and they asked me, did I think we had heard all of it? And I said, of course not. I had at that time, it's not like I had any insider knowledge about what may or may not have happened at Cincinnati.
Right.
But I think we know now, when something like this happens and it's a news story of this nature, the likelihood of all of it coming out in one shot is extremely low. So the interesting thing about it, of course, is this is all happening in real time.
Right.
It's not some hypothetical. Like, USC needs to find an athletic director. And I talked about this as well this week, but
RJ, I don't know if you can hear me, but you're yep.
I
was say
back?
You froze up there for about 10 seconds on this side. So yeah, you're back now, I think. And you're frozen up. Well, there you are. There you are. Well, he's frozen up again. If you can hear, I'm going to text you here for just a second. This is just like good old live radio that we used to have. Let me see. Well, RJ's gonna log out and maybe try to log back in. The the joys of of live shows. RJ is going to try to jump back in with us here in just a minute and see exactly where we go. Let's see if we can get RJ back in here.
Are we back?
Are you with me? We're here for now.
I never left.
That's funny because I never left. Was I frozen up on your side by any chance?
Yes.
Interesting. So we were both frozen up to each other, but yeah.
Very indistinct pleasure of just watching myself ramble. And
yes.
That's a very limited interest to me at this point. I'm just trying to help you guys out. So yeah, no, but I think we're back. So I don't know at what point in the ramble we lost it, but I guess to tie it up, the point I was trying to make is just that USC is in kind of an interesting position because they are in a real-time search for an athletic director, and they need to have one. Like this is with everything that's going on in college sports and at USC in particular, they need one. But at the same time, there is a fallout. There is some kind of blowback and consequence to what is appearing with every passing day and week and every article that comes out to have been a very, very misguided hire.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it's going to be interesting to see exactly where that situation goes, because this obviously, there's a track record now at USC with, I've been here at Notre Dame covering Notre Dame for 20 plus years. And in that time, there have been 2 athletic directors, and it's been a bit of, pretty smooth transition. USC has had 4 in that time, and they've had to move on one to the other just because there's always been some kind of, I don't know if controversy might be too strong, but at least some kind of issue with each of them.
Right. I mean, look, I'm certainly aware of that 20-year history. I've only been on the beat for a few years, but I think the safest thing to say is that the vast majority of those transitions were not intentional, not planned, and not part of any design. So whatever you want to say about the regime of Mike Garrett, about Pat Hayden, about, Lynn Swann, and now about Mike Bohn, this wasn't part of a plan on USC's part. And I think one of the interesting takeaways and one of the things that I've started to get a sense of that is happening at the university level and at the leadership level is I think they are enduring some growing pains with regards to kind of a culture shift and a philosophical shift. I don't think there's any question that football remains a massive priority at USC as it does at Notre Dame, and it is a massive part of the institution's identity. But I also think that, the Mike Bohn situation, if there's anything concrete we can say as we wait for more information to really get out about what happened, I think one thing we can say is that, that the mindset of a lot of fans at a lot of schools, and a lot of schools, to be honest with you, is if you got the football coaching hire right and things are right with the football program, you're pretty good as the athletic director.
Yeah.
Everything else is just the cherry on the sundae.
That's exactly right.
I think that's not a crazy statement to say about a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
I think what we are seeing now is that is not the case at USC anymore. And it doesn't mean that football is being deprioritized. It just means that there are third rail offenses, and there are things that you just don't get swept under the rug. And by the way, nor should they be swept under the rug. But I think we're seeing now a USC kind of in this philosophical, kind of existential, I don't want to say crisis, but they're in a transition period where it's like, what are we as a university? What is acceptable here? I mean, keep in mind, you referenced the last 20 years of just athletic department turmoil, but the school has had issues, huge issues, lawsuits about issues pretty much in line with what we're hearing with Mike Bohn, at least in terms of the mistreatment of women, the sexual harassment type stuff, right? So this is all just kind of coming to a head for the school, and I think they're trying to wade their way through what's right and what's wrong. And I think at the end of the day, right now, they've kind of resoundingly decided that it's not enough for success to be happening on the field and in the courts and all that stuff, that there is a way you have to run things now and the way you should be running things now. And if you run afoul of that stuff, it's not going to be business as usual.
Yeah. Let's talk some football. It's more fun to talk about football than ADs
Please,
and
let's.
stuff like that. Yes, that's exactly right. So just like Marcus Freeman, of course, here at Notre Dame, it was Lincoln Riley's second spring out there at USC. So I'm curious, was there a noticeable difference from spring 1 to spring 2 for what you guys were able to see of Lincoln Riley and the Trojans?
I think there's a comfort level. I think there was a sense that, and Lincoln Riley kind of said this multiple times over the course of the spring, there's just a sense of the leap off point, kind of the understanding, and the most pointed thing I think he said was just kind of the understanding on the part of the players about the level of play and the level of effort and the level of intensity was more understood coming into the spring. There was a lot less having to say, no, we have to do it at this level. There was a lot more, okay, we know this is the level that it has to be done.
Sure.
And so that's kind of a natural, I think, evolution, especially when you succeed. You've gotten the players' attention, they understand what will fly. So I think they had that advantage this spring. I think they're just more comfortable being at USC, understanding how USC works, understanding the logistics of everything and making that work. So from a staff side, I think there was another level of comfort. And, it's important because this year's team is going to still be, to a large extent, one of those 1-year cycle teams. I think we probably, I'm sure, because I always talk about it, but we talked about it probably the last time we discussed it. But, when Lincoln Riley showed up, change was desperately needed.
Sure.
He changed a lot. And he said all along, look, this isn't what I want it to be every offseason. He wants to get to kind of that classic model where your program is comprised of guys who have been in your program for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, and that's who you see on the field. Guys that you recruited as high schoolers, the traditional model. Well, I think they've taken steps towards more of that and building a roster that will eventually become that, but they're not there yet. And you saw that with all the portal activity, and not just portal activity, but there are starters we can kind of point to right now that they have brought in. So I think they've moved towards more of a long-lasting traditional approach, but this is still kind of the second year of this team will exist within the span of this calendar year. And then next year, it's going to be a much different group. It's not this thing where we kind of know who's going to be here for their second, third, fourth, and fifth years with the portal, because you don't know who's leaving and you don't know who's coming. So, I think there was more comfort with that reality. I think everyone just kind of knows more about how it works. So I think there were steps. Taken, and I think you could kind of see it, not so much on the field, but I think just the sense you got from the players and the coaches that things are a little more accelerated compared to where they were a year ago at this time.
I would imagine. And, and just kind of what you're saying with the portal, there were at least 11 incoming portal guys. If the number that the last number that I saw anywhere, it was right around 11, but they lost a few as well. So what you're saying is you don't expect there to be this kind of year-to-year turnover going forward. Maybe it decreases a little bit every year. There's always, I think everyone's always going to have some portal activity, but you don't expect it to be in the kind of volume that it's been these first couple of years for him.
Well, I think that's the plan. I think the safest thing to say is that Lincoln Riley doesn't expect that. Right. Now, the reality may play out differently. You just don't know how this is all going to work. The interesting thing is, in the case of starting with, I would say, you look at Caleb Williams and Mario Williams, a wide receiver who came from Oklahoma right after their freshman year. Mm-hmm. And then you look at a player like Bear Alexander, the defensive lineman from Georgia, who they brought in and is kind of the crown jewel of the transfer portal class. It's one of these weird things where we're living in this space now where you almost would rather take the silver in a high school recruitment. Because in the case of all three of those players, the school that won the recruitment lost them after 1 year.
Yeah.
And the school that gains them has them for a minimum of 2.
That's true.
When it's just this weird thing, right? You're never trying to not win, but the bottom line is that it was better for USC. Obviously, things changed because of the coaching change, but it was better for USC that Caleb Williams went to Oklahoma out of high school.
Right.
Whereas when he was committing, someone said, "Hey, USC, would you love to sign Caleb Williams?" Of course, they're all going to say yes. Why wouldn't we? Right? But it's better for them because now he's here and they knew they had him for 2 years. Same with Mario Williams and same with Bear Alexander, who's transferring in right now as a freshman. It's not just that they've got this super talented young player, but unlike his freshman year, they know they've got him for 2 years. So you're going to get a weird sense of kind of pseudo continuity just because of that, right? Every time you bring in a guy in that category, right? A 1 year departure, you know you've got him for 2. And if he's really good, you probably don't expect anyone was ever going to have him for a 4th year. So you're kind of getting the best 2 years of it. So it's weird. I mean, it's all up in the air right now. I think it's such a Wild West mentality at this point of what works, what doesn't. But in a weird way, they found a different path towards roster continuity and stability through the portal. But not everybody's in that category. Mason Cobb is a linebacker from Oklahoma State that they've brought in. And I mean, he showed up talking about improving his NFL draft stock. I mean, if he could sign up for the draft now, today, for next year's draft, he'd have done it. I mean, it's very clear. He's a 1 year player. He's going to be here for 1 year. The same goes for, a couple of the other guys. So it's not like across the board they found that, but that's kind of the sweet spot is if you can get a talented guy, Anthony Lucas, defensive lineman from Texas A&M, exact same category, 5-star guy. USC was in the mix for him at one point, quote unquote, lost the recruitment, but now they've got him for his 2nd and 3rd year of college football.
Yeah.
I think there's weird paths, kind of happy accidents. But yeah, to go back to the question that you asked, a few days ago, I think Lincoln Riley would rather have a far more conventional roster turnover situation. I just don't know that in this world and at this moment in the history in the game, I don't know how feasible it is. It's tough to break out of those 1 year cycles once you start with it.
Yeah. One of the guys they lost, Cortland Ford from the offensive line, one of their tackles, is offensive line. Is that the biggest offensive question that they really have to address heading into the summer workouts and toward training camp in the fall?
I think because of the veterans that they brought in and because we saw how well they integrated newcomers last year, I think there's a lot more faith that group is going to be fine, both in terms of the starters and the depth that they're able to come up with. Interestingly, I think, still the strongest position group on the offensive side of the ball, talent-wise, would have to be the wide receiver room. If you just talk about the amount of really good guys still in that room. But that said, I think the most uncertainty has to do with who's stepping up, who are really going to be the guys, who are going to be the go-to guys, who are going to be the guys that Caleb Williams goes to when the chips are really down, right? And I don't think that's been established at all. I don't think USC knows right now who that is. And I think that's one of the bigger things to get resolved in fall camp is just the true pecking order. There are not a lot of wrong choices. There's not a lot of bad options at this point. But as opposed to, last season where Caleb Williams obviously loved throwing to Jordan Addison.
Mm-hmm.
He loved throwing to Mario Williams, who came with him from Oklahoma. Those two guys did have some separation. And then guys kind of stepped up over the course of the year. Guys like Brendan Rice, who's back. But I think the most uncertainty on the offensive side of the ball, probably the pecking order at wide receiver. I think they feel pretty good about where things are on the offensive line at this point.
Really? Okay. Other side of the ball, you mentioned the linebackers, and that was a big concern, at least going into the spring. They do have some transfers, and that's it. Just how things piece together when you've got as many transfers. I guess you find out as you go along. But they were 112th in points allowed. They were 117th in rushing yards per attempt last year. You talked about bringing in Bear Alexander for the defensive line. Do you expect him to have major impact? I assume he kind of has to have some major impact for that all to come together this year.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking up the statistical profile for USC's defense last year, it's very hard to find a ranking that doesn't have 3 digits in it. That's just the reality. And I think the expectation is it's kind of a shotgun approach in a certain way, in the sense that, yeah, I mean, the expectations are very high for Bear Alexander. I think the expectations are high for Anthony Lucas. Anthony Lucas was a 5-star. I mean, he was a top recruit in his class. They brought in Keon Bars from Arizona, kind of a starter level interior defensive lineman. I don't think they totally know who the real stars are going to be, but I think what they're confident in, at least cautiously optimistic, is that the sum total of all these guys is going to move the needle. I mean, in a very cynical way, there's kind of only one place for the needle to go at this point with how much they struggled last year. But I think that what they're looking at is saying to themselves, look, if you look at points per drive, USC had the best offense in the country last year. Defensively, like I said, deep triple digits. I think points per drive a lot. It might be 122. I've looked it up so many times, but yet it's just a staggering number. The point is, I think if you're USC, what you're saying, okay, we like what we're cooking with a lot better this year than we did last year, especially at linebacker, especially when you talk about the depth that we don't even know who our starters are, but any combination of these guys has to be better than last year. And if you look at a team that was so good on offense and so bad on defense and went 11-3, you're saying to yourself, we don't have to become Georgia to get to the college football playoff or to win the Pac-12. If they graduate to mediocrity, they're going to be a really hard team to beat, So I think that's kind of, they want to be good. They want to be great on both sides of the ball. But realistically, I think you're saying to yourself, okay, guys, it can't be this bad. If we move the needle at all in a measurable way, it's going to be really, really difficult to beat us.
Well, and one thing, you've got a Heisman winning quarterback like Caleb Williams. You're coming off a New Year's Six Bowl. Being in the playoff is kind of what everyone's talking about with USC, it seems like right now. Now, they didn't have to play Oregon and Washington last year,
Correct.
Only Utah. But obviously they played Utah twice because of the Pac-12 championship game. They're going to play all 3 of them this year. And the last 5 games of their schedule go Utah, Cal, then Washington, at Oregon, and then UCLA, which was also a really good running team, as you well know, last year. So it seems like that kind of ups the ante for them this year, doesn't it?
Well, and I think you could, if you just, I appreciate the humility, but if you just stretch it back 1 week, it's Notre Dame right before they play Utah.
That's true tue. I was thinking more like conference race and stuff like that. But yeah,
right,
that's absolutely right. Bigger picture. Yeah.
But for the conference race, when your biggest conference game is coming right after a road game against Notre Dame, that's a factor.
That's true.
That's a factor in the conference race, right? And honestly, if you look last year, they had a really emotional and physically draining win over UCLA. And a lot of us expected that to catch up with them in the Notre Dame game the following week. It didn't happen. They actually played what I would argue was easily their best, most complete game of the year. They looked really good and played a really strong game.
Seemed like it from here.
6 days later, in Las Vegas against a tough Utah team, and the check came due. So the sequencing of this stuff really does matter, as you're saying. Like, if you look at the first half of the schedule ahead of the Notre Dame game, those are games that are either projected blowouts or they might be competitive, but there's no chance USC is not going to be favored in those games. Starting with the Notre Dame game, there are hurdles, and they're coming in a row because USC, take this however you want, but in its final year of the Pac-12, they will play 9 straight games. Their first bye week, I think, is September 16th because they're playing a week 0 game. And then their next bye week isn't until Thanksgiving weekend. So they're playing 9 games in a row. They're playing all those games consecutively. So I think the path is certainly tougher this year than it was last year, if we're talking about the schedule. And as you said, Oregon, Washington, and that's at Oregon, right? So you've got all those schools coming at you in a row. It's a challenge. The stakes are like, if USC gets to the playoff or wins the Pac-12 championship this season, they will have done so through a much tougher schedule than they had last year.
Yeah, and it is the last year in the Pac-12, and it's been not quite a year since we talked after that. I mean, we talked during the season, obviously, as well, but we talked specifically about, the news, USC and UCLA going to the Pac-10 last summer. So a year later, how are fans with that right now? Is there a lot of anticipation? Like, where are they?
I think that last season left them so kind of caught up in the moment that I don't really get a sense. I think it's still in the minds of most fans a distant hypothetical. It's not realistically distant. It's where we're going to be a year from now. But, I think it's really been more all about this season. And when you're playing, when you expect to be playing for a championship, it's not kind of this. There haven't been a lot of farewell tour vibes that I've gotten from the fan base, and it's interesting because, if they were a lesser team with lower expectations, you start kind of thinking about that kind of stuff. But I think right now their thought is it's just all about this season and what can we do. And being honest, this season, even with the tougher schedule, shapes up as a far more conducive path to the college football playoff than whatever the 2024 looks like. Because now you're in the Big Ten, and you're going to be dealing with that. It's going to be harder. I mean, but even if you just limit it to logistics without even seeing what the schedule is, right? It's going to be harder. You're talking about 9 Big Ten games. I'm assuming, I don't think anything officially has come out, but I would be stunned if Notre Dame wasn't continuing to be part of that, right? So now you're talking about 10 games, plus they're opening on a neutral field against LSU. So the 2024 schedule,
wow,
includes LSU, Notre Dame, and a Big Ten schedule.
Well, I was going to say, and I would just have to wager, even if they don't get both Michigan and Ohio State, they've got to get one of them in year one.
Right.
I would think there's no way they're going to get away with not playing one of them.
From the Big Ten's,
yeah.
Big Ten's point of view, you're not bringing them in to play Rutgers.
Right.
You want them on the field with Michigan and or Ohio State. Right. That's kind of the unspoken, and we'll see how it all plays out. It's been an interesting thing, as obviously I have a Stanford background, and Stanford, Cal, UCLA, and USC were adamant when the Pac-12 went to a divisional format that regardless, they're playing each other every year. And the Pac-12 kind of acquiesced to that. One of the ways they kind of made those schools pay for it is that because Notre Dame and Stanford, for obvious reasons, also said we're not giving up Notre Dame either, which is why Stanford and USC are always the first Pac-12 game every year, and they always have to play a week earlier than everybody else does. So my point with that is simply just that the Big Ten is going to find a way to put USC in the best spotlight games as often as it can, as it should. And so back to your original question, I think that is just so far in the distance right now in the wake of probably your best shot at getting to a college football playoff in the here and now.
Right. Well, and one of our listeners, Salty, was just asking about USC playing in November games in the upper Midwest, and there's all this stuff going on right now. I don't know if you've heard it out there, but there are these Big Ten teams grumbling about, oh, we didn't know when we signed this NBC contract that we were going to have to play night games in November. Right. It's like, this is a primetime contract. I don't know what they expected, and I can't imagine that Southern California teams are all that excited about it. The prospect of playing some of those night games here in the Midwest somewhere.
If burly Penn State and rugged Michigan State are moving indoors,
exactly,
the game in November, I think it's safe to say that there's nobody super excited out here about playing that type of game. What I will say is that I do expect there to be some type of balance in the sense of maybe, the temperature is the temperature. You can only do so much about that. But I think for every 9 a.m. game that USC gets saddled with, I think there's going to be a corresponding 10 p.m. body clock game.
Very true.
For a Big Ten school to have to deal with when they come out to play USC. I think that conversation's been had. I think that discussion's already existing. I think that there's no way USC is signing up for, 6 9 a.m. games or, 3 road games in November without something that kind of balances that out and mitigates it. So, it'll be what it'll be. But I think, again, as I said, a lot of domes.
That's right.
Domes in the footprint is all I'll say. And
a lot of domes, and you've got 2 LA teams, so they can't get all the the night games in Los Angeles, but at the same time, everyone out here, I would imagine, just like Notre Dame, those Thanksgiving weekends are going to be lining up to have those opportunities to play some night games in LA.
That's the other part of it too, right? Is that you're suddenly saying to yourself, wait a minute. Yeah, we want the best competitive advantage, but you're really giving us a choice between Los Angeles in November and West Lafayette.
Yeah,
I don't even think that's a choice in West Lafayette.
Just do what Notre Dame did. If you get a Pac-12 game in Las Vegas every November, play an off-campus game, a neutral site game like that. Why not?
I'm not signing up for that.
That's right. Everyone from whether it's Iowa or Wisconsin, where they'd make that trek to Las Vegas in November, I'm sure. Hey, Jesse, before we cut you loose here in a minute, RJ, Jesse was jumping back in and he said that he's got a question for you. So a bonus Stires question. What do you got?
Yeah,
what do you got, Jess?
It's a three-way. It's a three-way match here. Hell in a cell right now. All right,
Stires squared.
What do you got for me?
I'm just curious, your overall thoughts for Caleb Williams next year. Do you think that we saw the peak? Do you think that there might be any sort of regression? And it might not even be his play, but you got to look at what's around him from last season to this season. Do you see his game going to a next level next season?
When you look statistically, I'm not sure how much of a next level there is.
That's what I mean. So it's hard to live up and go beyond what you did last year.
Look, he was not a flawless player. He is my take on Caleb Williams is that, number one, he is a player with a level of athleticism that I'm not even sure anyone outside of Lamar Jackson can match at the quarterback position. I can't tell you how many times I would watch a pocket collapse and in my mind just mentally move on to the sack that was coming in the next play, and then suddenly he's not.
That was every Notre Dame play.
I was going to say Notre Dame wishes that happened. Notre Dame wishes that happened once.
I'm sure that feels familiar, right? And it wasn't an experience that was distinct to Notre Dame. So he has a level of athleticism and escapability and arm talent that college football, especially playing in a Lincoln Riley offense, he threw to a lot of wide open guys last year. College football is just never going to look hard for him. It's just not. Now, when you talk about crossing the T's, dotting the I's, can he get better? Can his decision making get better? I think there is still room for improvement there. I think there is room for accuracy improvement. It's not like he was categorically inaccurate, but I think he thinks he can get better. I think there's more on the table for him. I think Lincoln Riley thinks it is. I don't know if it's going to be significantly different. And the other thing is, like we were talking with Sean about the schedule, is that he may be really good in different ways that don't translate to amazing stats. If he's got to dig out a game at Oregon where maybe the stats aren't great, but he leads them to kind of a rousing comeback win or something like that. Was he better that year than he wasn't, even if he didn't have great numbers? So it's going to be tough for the numbers to get better, but I do think he can get better in terms of his NFL draft profile, which is, again, kind of a ridiculous thing to say because he is the number 1 draft pick.
Right. And that's kind of, I guess, what I was getting at is it seems statistically he's not going to jump more. It's going to be more of the kind of stuff that we don't see, the natural leadership, like you were talking about, the composure to lead a comeback, like those sort of things to build that kind of draft profile that you were talking about.
RJ, are you still with us?
We good?
Yep, I think so. I think he's frozen up again. Maybe that's our cue to wrap things up. He lasted right till the end. RJ, hopefully you can still hear me. If not, I appreciate you. Oh, are you there? He's frozen up here. He was just starting to come back through. Jesse, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. RJ, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, there he is. All right. I wanted to ask you real quick. Maybe I'm pushing my luck here after that. The Bronny James commitment to USC. Obviously it's basketball, but I'm curious how that moves the needle in that market, obviously with his dad playing there.
I'm curious too, because to be quite honest with you, it's kind of reached a point where you wonder if anything can move the needle for USC men's basketball. I mean, they've strung
the
together.
Mobley brothers, that was like the highlight for a while, right?
It was, but you didn't get the sense, like there were a couple big games that they would sell out, but you just didn't get the sense that they had taken over for their stretch of the calendar. You didn't get the sense that at any given moment, if there was USC football content or news to break, that everyone wasn't going to just leave the arena and go deal with that first. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. I mean, it's not just Bronny James, they also signed the number 1 recruit in the class. They got Isaiah Collier as well. So like, if this doesn't move the needle, I'm not sure what will. But I don't think you can just say as a foregone conclusion, it's going to make things different. I think there'll be a curiosity factor at first, but they should be a really good team. But they've been a really good team. As Jesse said, I mean, they had the Mobley brothers. They had 2 NBA guys in their front court, and that was they were good. They did well, but it didn't really galvanize the fan base necessarily. So it remains to be seen just how much of a footprint they can move, they can establish there.
RJ, I appreciate it as always. Thanks for your patience. We both, it's technology is always fun to deal with, but glad we could do it. A lot of great information as always.
No, I love it. Twice the Stires. I got 2 for 1. So this is a winning. Is a winning effort for me. I'm very happy. Happy to do it.
All right, RJ Abeytia. You can read his stuff at uscfootball.com. I'm sure we'll check in here in a few months, come October, when we're counting down to the days when USC is coming in here to Notre Dame.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Take care, RJ. Thanks a lot. All right. We made it through. Jess, are you still with me there?
I am still here.
Yeah, I've got all kinds of technology stuff going on my end. So hopefully everything stays together. But that's right. Tommy Guns. It is Stires Squared. Jesse, are you ready for rapid fire?
I have been waiting all day.
Let's do it. Scale of 1 to 10. What chance do you give a Notre Dame player other than Joe Alt to be drafted in the first round next year?
I'm going to go a 5 out of 10 because I think it's like a 50-50 chance. I think that some of the strong contenders are obviously Sam Hartman, but that is contingent on what he does this season. So it's a boomer bust season for him, and he's only going to help his draft stock depending on how he plays in more of a pro style NFL friendly type offense. And then I think another person, we were talking about this a little bit in the pyramid on Tuesday. I think Blake Fisher has the body and the what an NFL tackle should look like, but can he step up and live up to his body frame essentially? Can he play like an NFL offensive lineman because he's got the NFL type body? So for me, those are the two guys that I think have the best chance outside of Joe Alt to go in the first round next year. And I think between the two, I put it at like a 5 or 6 out of 10. So right around 50-60% is what I would give it. Kind of a toss up in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's Fisher, I think, is the next logical choice because when you look at the tandem, last year they were considered the best young, sophomore tackle tandem in the nation, and now they're going into their junior seasons. Alt definitely had the bigger rise than Fisher, but like just today, each of them were named Athlon All-Americans, along with Benjamin Morrison, of course. Those are the three who are getting, like Morrison, Alt, Morrison, whichever order that you want to go in. Maybe you put Alt ahead because he's draft eligible this year and Morrison isn't. But it's like those two are the top ones that it seems like are grabbing the national attention right now. And then Fisher right after them. I think Fisher's going to have a really good chance. Right tackles, obviously, typically don't get the love that the left tackles have. But I think that Fisher has a really good chance to play himself into there. The number, I might bump it just a little bit higher because Hartman and Fisher are the two that I'm thinking about. And the thing with Hartman, even though he's sticking around for a 6th year, like because of the fact he is a quarterback, other quarterbacks are going to find themselves in the, like quarterbacks that people aren't talking about right now are going to find themselves in that conversation, a little bit less than a year from now. At this point, because we're what, about a month past the draft now at this point. But I think Sam Hartman has a really good shot of working his way in there. The average is right around 3 first-round quarterbacks drafted per year. So you're going to have Drake May, you're going to have Caleb Williams in whatever order, as we were just talking about. Probably I would put Caleb Williams definitely ahead of Drake May, but I think Hartman has a really good chance to find himself in that conversation next year. And because you've got Fisher and you've got Hartman, I'll bump it up to a little bit better than 50-50 at a 6 that someone other than Alt gets drafted in the first round for the Irish.
It's crazy. I was looking at like just like some early projections for the draft next year, and it's obviously way too early. But would you believe me if I told you this website has 14 quarterbacks ahead of Sam Hartman for best quarterbacks in the draft next year?
Really? That's
14 quarterbacks. Yeah.
That's
Cameron
amazing.
Ward from Washington State, Jaden Daniels from LSU, Riley Leonard from Duke, JJ McCarthy, Spencer Rattler, Shedeur Sanders, Joe Milton, Bo Nix, Quinn Ewers.
The biggest
guys
question,
are proven to me.
Hartman is proven, but the biggest question that he has to answer is, can he play in a different system? Can he play in a pro style, more traditional system than that slow mesh that he's coming out of at Wake Forest? That's the question that he has to answer. If he can produce in Notre Dame's system, I think he's got a really good chance to be, if not a first rounder, at least a second round type guy next year, like Will Levis, who was talking about Will Levis a year ago. You know?
It seems that he's the guy that's got the most to prove, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think he has the most potential to gain, you know what I mean? Because of just what you were talking about. Can he show that he's versatile and working in a different style of offense?
Josh wants to know, will Alt leave a year early? When's the last time an O-line player left early from Notre Dame? Well, a lot of those guys, they didn't leave early because they had to continue to improve their stock, to basically become, even like the first round guys to get into that conversation. So they stuck around a year longer. Like Josh Patterson, if he was going to be a first-round guy or not Josh Patterson, Jarrett Patterson, if he was going to be a first-round guy, he would have left last year. I mean, he stayed, and he still unfortunately wasn't a high-round pick. But if Joe Alt at the end of the season is still being talked about as a first-round guy, I've got no doubt he's going to leave, especially with the dad who has the background that he has. And because it's Notre Dame, he'll be on pace to get his degree in 3 years. Like, they want them all to get their degrees in 3 years. So he would have his degree in hand potentially. There's no reason he won't leave if he's projected to be a first-round pick. There's just way too much money on the line to stick around for another year and risk, injury and or even losing draft stock as opposed to improving it. You can't improve it enough if you're projected to be a first-round guy to come back for another year. So Notre Dame and NBC, of course, announced their kickoff times for home games this season. The Navy game in Dublin, which even though, of course, it's in Dublin, is still considered a Notre Dame home game. The Central Michigan game, they're both going to kick off at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. The games against Tennessee State, Pittsburgh, and Wake Forest are going to kick off at 3:30. My question, which kickoff time do you prefer, 2:30 or 3:30?
I'm going to be quite honest with you. I really don't have a whole bunch of preference when it comes to 2:30 or 3:30. And I don't have to be there. I don't have to watch the sunset. I don't have to, see the days get shorter as we get into the fall. Like, I am at home watching TV on Saturday for most games. And I think I would actually prefer the 3:30 game because usually there's a big game on at noon, and then I hit the 3:30 game with Notre Dame, and then at the end of that game, there's usually a primetime 7 or 8 game going on. So I like 3:30 more so for the spacing of all the other games throughout the day, and I think that would be my leading logic on that.
See, but if you get it at 2:30, then
you're not going to convince me.
You've got to jump on the 3:30 games, and then you can watch the Notre Dame game and still watch the tail end of the 3:30 games if you choose to do it that way, or you're flipping back and forth. Like when halftime comes around, you can watch some of the, part of the 3:30 game, go back to Notre Dame.
3:30 also allows me to get more done before 3:30.
Personally, me. So what am I going to say?
You're going to say 2:30 because you're a grouchy old guy and you don't like to be at the stadium later than you have to be.
I'm always going to take the earlier games. Now, noon is pushing it. I would not take noon. 1:30.
Oh, no.
I like the days when we still got 1:30 kickoffs personally. Now that was back when we weren't on daylight saving, when Notre Dame when Indiana didn't change the clocks. That's when we still got the 1:30 kickoffs. I think they all went to 2:30 basically when we started, moved over to Eastern time permanently and started changing our clocks and all that kind of stuff. The earlier, the better. So I will always take the 2:30 games. I am not vehemently opposed to the 3:30 games. I mean, that's typically the afternoon window when most of the other games are kicking off anyway, is at 3:30. So I'm not diabolically opposed to it. I know some people I've seen say they like the 3:30 because it gives them an extra hour of tailgating, which, there's nothing wrong with that either, but I'll take 2:30, especially since they still don't sell any beverages inside the stadium. Now, again, that's not for me. I'm talking about for the tailgaters and stuff like that. Fill in the blank. It is blank that BYU, Nebraska, and Colorado are among FBS teams that are holding transfer portal camps where uncommitted players in the transfer portal can show up for a tryout.
It's a brilliant idea by BYU, Nebraska, and Colorado. They must have been listening to this show and hearing us talk about how there should be some sort of transfer portal all-star game. They just turned it into a camp and said, hey, you're still in the portal. You want a shot to play here. We're looking to add, especially Colorado, as many players as possible. I think it's a great idea. It's just like it's the same concept as, walk-ons that they have at the beginning of the year. They hold a camp at whatever, school you're at, like Penn State when Eli Manning showed up that one time. But yeah, I just think it's just a spinoff of, a walk-on tryout essentially. But I think the players are better potentially. And yeah, I just think it's a really good idea. And I think you're going to see a lot more teams probably doing it going forward. I think these are the guys who are going to be ahead of the pack and kind of be the trailblazers of, what to do with the transfer portal.
The NCAA has released numbers. Almost 40% of guys who enter the transfer portal over the last 2 years that they've had this did not end up at a new school. Almost 40%. So, that's pushing half the guy, just a little bit less than half the guys who enter the portal don't end up at a new school. And, they've got to pay to go to these camps, just like when, when guys were in high school and you pay to go to these different camps and you show up and, trying to get recruited and signed for the first time. This is exactly the reason they need some kind of collaborative showcase like what we were talking about. You put together one weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, whatever. You put together some kind of weekend showcase like a combine, just like the NFL does. You bring all these guys in to a centralized location. And then if you've got enough guys at each position, you put together some kind of game and you have them play, and you've got these coaches out there watching them. Why make them go to all these multiple camps all over the country? If there are this many guys, if nearly 40% are still unsigned at this point, and probably right now it's even more than 40%, I bet it's closer to half, put together a centralized combine and do it that way rather than make them go to, camp after camp across the country trying to get somebody to sign them. It's the perfect excuse to do something like that.
I agree.
And heck, the NCAA is in Indianapolis. It's their system. They've set up this system. Do it just like the NFL. Just run it out of Lucas Oil. It's in the middle of the country. Do it down there. You can do a pro combine there. Do a college combine down there as well. I don't see why not. We kind of touched on this when we were talking to RJ a little bit ago. Penn State, Michigan State. They're going to play a primetime game on NBC on Black Friday at Ford Field in Detroit. So playing that game on that Friday at Ford Field also means that Michigan's state football championship games are going to have to be pushed back a day. They're going to have to play them Saturday, Sunday that weekend rather than Friday, Saturday. Do you buy or sell the move?
I'm pretty indifferent on the move. I think overall, we're talking about now there's an NFL game on Black Friday. There is going to be a college game now in the evening time on Black Friday. I enjoy the fact that I'll have football to watch on Black Friday. It's just another day of the week where I can, chill out and watch football around the holidays. But the game itself, Michigan State and Penn State, that doesn't move the needle for me. A Big Ten game between Penn State and Michigan State, might it be a halfway decent game? Sure, but it's not one where I'm oh my gosh, I'm absolutely jacked up. I need to watch this. It's not Alabama and Auburn, or Alabama and Tennessee, or maybe USC and Oregon, or, Clemson, North Carolina. It's not one of those games for me. So I'm indifferent on it, but I'm glad that I have something to watch on Black Friday while I'm kind of just chilling out and recovering from Thanksgiving.
Yes, recovering from all that eating on Thanksgiving. I mean, it's always nice to have a little football program going on, so we're going to have Jets Dolphins at 3 p.m. for the NFL. And then just a little bit after that ends, you're going to have Michigan State, Penn State. I won't mind having it on. The reason they're moving this to Ford Field is the stuff that, again, we were talking about with RJ and what we were talking about earlier this week. All these northern Big Ten schools are whining because, it's cold in November in the Midwest and they don't want to play these night outdoor games. Newsflash, what happens if you make the college football playoff? Are you going to move it inside to a dome? We've talked about this before. Are you going to move it into a dome, or are you going to play it on your own campus where you've got a home field weather advantage? Like if you've got, one of these Southern schools coming up, or a Southern California school, or whatever it happens to be. Be big boys and get outside. High school kids are playing outside. Now a lot of them, are playing in these domes. I think it stinks that they're pushing these high school games back. They were already scheduled. Obviously nobody knows exactly who's going to be playing in them at this point because they've got to earn their way there. But hopefully this is just a one-off deal. And the Penn States, Michigan States, Ohio State, Michigans of the world can figure this out and, pull on their big boy pants and go, it's okay if we play a night game outdoors in November. We know that Notre Dame has done it plenty of times before. So I don't know why there's such an aversion of the Big Ten to get outside in November and play a football game.
Yeah, it's a little bit surprising to me as well. It's like the majority of the Big Ten resides in the Midwest, and it's always cold in the Midwest in November and December. So like you have to be used to it at this point, right? So I'm on the same page. It seems like there's this rush to all of a sudden kind of get indoors. So I think it's like the Big Ten's like, all right, well, we got to play in prime time. We'll move one of these games inside and put it on a day where there's not a lot of other football. So it's like a win-win for them almost.
Yeah. From a programming standpoint, it's great. I saw some Michigan State fans going, good, we don't have to go to a half-empty stadium in East Lansing. We'll go to Ford Field. The question is how many people will actually show up at Ford Field for that game. But, I don't know. So I like the programming. The fact that it's at Ford Field, take it or leave it. Fill in the blank. The most overhyped college football team this offseason is blank.
The most overhyped team this offseason is blank. I'm going to go one school from the ACC and one school from the SEC.
Okay, you're going to give us two.
I think Tennessee is mildly overrated, considering that they haven't been very proven over the past, 10, 15 years, but they had a really good year last year.
Hold off on your ACC team. Finish your thought on I'll give my ACC team. We'll see if it's the same, but you can continue with Tennessee. Go ahead.
Yeah, so then Tennessee, I just there's not a proven track record there. And I don't know if that for what they play in and what we've seen of them, I just think that it was a one-off. Like, I hope they can get back to it. Like, I remember, what was that, like mid-2000s, I want to say, maybe even early 2000s when Notre Dame would play Tennessee. And it like Tennessee was good at that time. Like that, I think that's kind of when we saw their decline was right after.
Back in the Phil Fulmer days.
Yep. Yeah, and I just, not that I'm like a huge Tennessee fan, but I'm not rooting against them. And I'm not like overly actively like, oh, I want Tennessee to be good. But I think it's good for college football in the SEC when Tennessee is better, but I just think they're a little bit overhyped going into this season.
I agree. I want to see them put together back-to-back seasons. They're going to have a new quarterback this year. The one that I'm going with is the one that our friend Roger Dodger is voting for.
That was my ACC one.
And I had a feeling that's who it would be. And Florida State, it just feels like Texas. Like every year we're told Texas is back, but they're never really back. And I realize that Florida State's coming off a double-digit win season. They were 10-3. They won the Cheez-It Bowl. Okay, best record since 2016. But, they play LSU again. They play Clemson again. That's in the first month in the season. They're going to play Miami and Florida. They lost to NC State last year, and they play them again this year too. And, NC State's got Brennan Armstrong, so people are expecting them to be pretty good this year. Jordan Travis has gotten incrementally better each year, but he's still a career 61% passer. So I just have a hard time completely buying into, all of a sudden this Florida State team, okay, now they're top 10. They're going to challenge for a college football playoff spot. I just think there's a lot for them still to prove. It's one thing to do it for 1 year, just like you were saying with Tennessee. It's another thing to do it in back-to-back years.
I would agree.
Yeah. And, LSU getting a lot of hype. Do they deserve it? The BK breakdancing. You had me until BK breakdancing.
I actually think they're going to be a little bit better this year, to be honest.
They could be because their schedule is not that challenging, like that.
Yeah, and I think that they're going to they have a quarterback with more experience. They have a second-year head coach, so obviously he's turning over, his regime, his roster, his overall how he runs a program, etc. I wouldn't be surprised if LSU is about the same or a little bit better next season.
Yep, salty. Texas is back to playing below expectations, and we'll see. How about another team from Texas? TCU was 13-2 last year. Their Vegas over-under is 7.5 wins this season. So here's their schedule. We're going to predict the TCU schedule. They start with Colorado, a team that a lot of people have been talking about with too much hype right now. But, I guess Deion Sanders will do that. So TCU starts with Colorado. Then they've got Nichols. They go to Houston, then SMU and West Virginia at home, at Iowa State, followed by BYU, at Kansas State, at Texas Tech, Texas, Baylor, at Oklahoma. And now you notice Houston and what was the other one? BYU, those are two of the new teams in the Big 12. The Big 12, they're not going to play everybody this year because they've added the 4 new schools. So there you see TCU's schedule this season, over under 7.5 wins for the Horned Frogs.
Oh man, this is a tough one because it's like I feel like every year the Big 12 is inconsistent. Like you never can go into it and say these couple teams are going to be pretty solid the entire year. I feel like there's maybe one team that consistently is pretty good and the rest is kind of a toss-up. I guess we'll start with the first 3. I seen them winning against Colorado, Nichols. I think they're going to lose to Houston. I think I'm going to throw that out there right now.
Wouldn't be surprised.
And that first chunk. So that puts them at 2 wins.
Okay.
I think they beat SMU, and then they split between West Virginia and Iowa State. Yeah. And so I think at this point we're at 4-2. 4. And then I think they win against BYU. They lose against Kansas State. And then they beat Texas Tech, so we're at 6-3.
Agree.
And then towards the end, those last 3 games, I think
Texas, Baylor, at Oklahoma.
I think that they lose to Oklahoma.
I think they lose 2 of those games.
Yeah, and so that's kind of where I'm at. I think that they lose 2 of those 3 games and probably beat Baylor and lose to Texas and Oklahoma. So what? That puts me at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7-5. Like it's right there. I said it before. They're not going to be as good as they were last year. I think that Colorado game to start the season is going to be close. They were trending to be a not great team last year and just kind of hit, the one of those times where you just hit the strike of lightning, luck of the whatever it might be. They changed their trajectory, and I just don't see them doing that 2 seasons in a row. So I'm going to go under on the 7.5, and I think it's right at 7-5.
Yeah, I completely agree with your whole line of thinking there. I'm right there as well because it's year 2 for Sonny Dykes, and they were flirting with disaster a few times. Like if Daniels doesn't
the
get
amount
hurt,
of games that they won and towards the end, 1 possession, late comeback games, like you can't do that every year, and they don't have Max Duggan anymore.
That's exactly right. 5 of their wins last year were single-digit wins. The Baylor win was a 1 point last year, I believe it was. Texas was close. And, you look at even Oklahoma. TCU had lost 8 straight to the Sooners. Oklahoma was down for most of the year before they rebounded late in the season. They ended up getting to the bowl, played Florida State actually in that Cheez-It Bowl. But they had lost 11 of 12 to Oklahoma. And I can't see them putting together anywhere close to what they put together. I was surprised that the over-under is actually as low as it is at 7.5. But again, when you go through that schedule and you look at what things are going to look like, and not only did they lose Duggan, they lost Quentin Johnson. They lost LaDainian Tomlinson's son, Travius Hodges Tomlinson, who was an All-American corner last year. So there's a lot of talent from that college football playoff team that they lose. And so, I completely agree. I see them sitting right there at 7 wins as well. I'm surprised we've done a few of the different predict the records this week. I'm surprised how many unders that I've had already this season. I don't know if I'm just being pessimistic or what, but
I have a bonus question for you.
Okay, hit me.
Scale of 1 to 10. How surprised were you that Notre Dame baseball lost to the worst team in the ACC tournament with their season on the line?
And I'm glad you brought it up because I meant to include a baseball question and then I forgot, and then you were busy, so I didn't want to add it. I was shocked. Aiden Terrell just didn't look good.
He got all conference too.
I know. He gave up a leadoff home run, ended up giving up 3 bombs in 4 innings to Pittsburgh, and Pitt is the number 12 seed, and it really stews Notre Dame. They have no path out of pool play now. They play Wake
because
Forest.
the tie record, the automatic
Right.
seed ahead of you advances, and Wake Forest is, even they beat Wake Forest, Wake Forest is the number 1 overall. So a tie record, Wake
Exactly.
Forest is moving on.
Exactly.
I
And
guess I was just I was honestly shocked because, you know, going into that last week, they needed to win a lot of games. They lose to Northwestern. They lose 2 of 3 to Boston College, and it's like, okay, well, we can maybe reset here. We're in the ACC tournament. All we need to do is I was texting you. It's a blessing in disguise getting Wake Forest, because in this new format, it's pool play. Well, if you get the number 1 seed, then you're getting the worst seed in the whole tournament. So the idea or the thought process has to be,
you get the
okay,
worst
yes,
and
we
the
got
best,
Wake Forest,
and
but
you're
we
sitting
should
in
at
the
least
middle.
be able to beat Pittsburgh and then have our chances and roll the dice against Wake Forest. I just can't believe that they didn't handle business against Pittsburgh like that. I think it's, especially, you know, with everyone knew what the stakes were, right? You can't
win that game.
win that or lose that game against Pittsburgh.
I give them an outside chance. Like, if they can beat Wake Forest, they're going to have to wait and hope there aren't a lot of bid stealers this weekend. You know, the conference tournaments are going on right now, and the selection show is going to be Monday, Memorial Day. But they absolutely have to beat Wake Forest Friday night now at this point. They've got to beat Wake Forest, because that would at least give them one quality win coming out of this thing. Again, they're not going to advance out of pool play, but if they beat Wake Forest, it's a win over the number 1 team in the country, and it gives them a shot. But at this point, they've lost 4 out of 5, and you've lost to, you know, Northwestern and Pittsburgh, who both have RPIs in the 70s.
Lost to Michigan State twice.
Yeah, it's just not looking good right now. It reminds me a little bit of Dave Schrag's 2008 team. They were sitting with a couple weeks to go in the regular season. They were in position to host a regional that year, and then all of a sudden, they just couldn't win a game. They just, against anybody, they just started losing the last couple of weeks of the season. Things spun out of control, and not only did they not host, they didn't make the tournament at all. And, you know, again, Notre Dame's lost 4 out of 5, and 2 of those losses are to not good teams. So
I guess that's what's just so shocking is, like, did they put too much pressure on themselves? You know, were they thinking about winning at all costs rather than just going out and playing how they're supposed to?
Yeah, because then even Radek Burkholz came in, and he's been a quality arm for them here down the stretch, and he gave up a couple home runs to Pittsburgh yesterday as well. So it
seems like Pittsburgh was the one
unfortunate.
actually playing for their lives, except, you know, Notre Dame wasn't.
Yep, exactly. So they'll finish off the ACC tournament 7:00 tomorrow night in Durham, and then, you know, again, if they beat Wake Forest, I at least give them a shot at getting a bid, because but they were going into yesterday, according to some of the projections, among the last 4 in. Like, they had fallen to last 4 in, but losing to Pittsburgh probably puts them into that, you know, at the top of the first 4 out.
Oh, wow. So you're saying they were the first 4 in before losing to Pittsburgh.
Right.
Oh, I wish you wouldn't have told me that. It makes it hurt even more.
Yep, exactly. All right, well, that's going to do it for today. We appreciate you as always, and if you were here from the beginning, appreciate you working through some of the technical stuff we had with RJ, but once we got going, RJ had some good information on USC, of course, and always good with Jesse. Jesse and I will be back at 5:00 tomorrow for the Rapid Fire Friday show, so we'll talk to you then. Smash that like button on your way out. Roger Dodger, we appreciate you for stopping in today, even with that Trojan icon.
That's rivalry love from Roger Dodger. Right. He didn't have to say that.
Appreciate it. Hit the like button and, of course, subscribe. Oh, you know what? I forgot one question that we had from Chi-Town. Which Stires would win a game of horse? This is not even close. Jesse would smoke me, I think. He's the Cleveland YMCA baller. So I've got no
something
chance.
Like that. We played a 10:00 game last night. I think that's why I'm so cranky today. We were on a West Coast trip playing at 10:00 last night at the YMCA, and we can't guard the perimeter 3. So if anyone's got some defensive schemes to how to guard perimeter 3s, please let me know.
You might have to get Tommy over there. See if Tommy can get the legs out.
Yeah.
Horseshoes. We haven't played horseshoes around here in a long time. We might, with that mound we've got in the backyard, maybe we need to set up some horseshoes back there. That'd be
Start
a good thing to do.
utilizing it.
That's right. All right. We will talk to you tomorrow. Have a good one. IB Nation Sports Talk.